He is still worshipped. His face still hangs at the entrance of the most powerful nation on earth. His body still lies preserved in a crystal coffin, visited by millions every year. And yet, this one man may have caused more deaths than any other human being in recorded history. Not Hitler, not Stalin, not Genghis Khan, Mao Zedong. And the most disturbing part? Most of those deaths weren't from war. They came from a plan, his plan, to build a paradise. This is the story of how the son of a peasant became a god, and how that god became a monster. December 26, 1893. A boy is born in Shaoshan, a tiny farming village in Hunan Province, China. His name is Mao Zedong, which translates roughly to Mao, the Eastern Rising. His father, Mao Yichang, is a strict, frugal grain merchant who beats his son regularly. His mother, Wen Qimei, is a devout Buddhist, gentle, kind, the quiet opposite of her husband. Young Mao hates his father, absolutely despises the authority his father holds over him. And that hatred, that visceral, burning rejection of anyone telling him what to do, never leaves him. He reads everything he can: classical Chinese texts, stories of warrior emperors, ancient rebellions. He becomes obsessed with power, not inherited power, not noble blood, but earned power, revolutionary power. By the time he's a teenager, China itself is exploding. The Qing dynasty, which had ruled for over 250 years, is collapsing. Foreign powers like Britain, Japan, and France have carved China into pieces. The country is humiliated, broken, divided. And into that chaos, a young man with enormous ambition and no patience for weakness sees his opportunity. Mao doesn't just want to fix China, he wants to remake it, from the ground up, whatever the cost. In 1919, Mao is drawn into radical politics. He reads Marx, Lenin, and anarchist literature. He becomes one of the founding members of the Chinese Communist Party in 1921, a tiny underground group of just 53 people. Nobody would have bet a single coin on them back then. China in the 1920s and 30s is a brutal three-way war. The Communists, the nationalist government under Chiang Kai-shek, and the invading Japanese army. Mao nearly dies a dozen times. He's betrayed, ambushed, and hunted. In 1934, the nationalists trap the communist army, and they're forced to flee, 9,000 kilometers on foot through impossible mountains and frozen plains. This becomes known as the Long March. Of the 80,000 soldiers who started, fewer than 10,000 survive. But Mao does, and that survival becomes mythology. By the time World War II ends and the Communists defeat Chiang Kai-shek in 1949, Mao stands on the balcony of Tiananmen Gate in Beijing and announces to the world, "The Chinese people have stood up." The crowd goes absolutely insane. After a century of humiliation, famine, and colonial exploitation, China has a leader again, a strong one, a fearless one. They believe he will lead them to greatness. They have no idea what is coming. 1958. Mao has an idea. He looks at the Soviet Union, industrialized, powerful, feared, and he wants that for China, immediately. Not in 50 years. Now. He announces the Great Leap Forward, a plan to transform China from an agricultural peasant society into a modern communist superpower in just 15 years. On paper, it sounds bold, inspirational even. In practice, it becomes the greatest man-made famine in human history. Here's what happens. Mao orders millions of Chinese farmers, people who have grown rice for generations, to stop farming and instead smelt steel. The logic? China needs steel to be powerful, and with enough hands, they can outproduce the entire Western world. Furnaces are set up in every village. People melt down their own pots, pans, farm tools, and door hinges to meet the quota. The steel they produce is almost entirely useless, too brittle, too impure for industrial use, literally worthless. But here's the nightmare. While farmers are busy smelting junk metal, nobody is harvesting the crops. Rice, wheat, and corn rot in the fields across China. And then, it gets worse. Local Communist Party officials are terrified of Mao. If you report failure, you get purged. So they report success, wildly inflated success. Villages that produced 1,000 pounds of grain report 100,000 pounds. Mao believes the numbers. He orders massive grain exports to the Soviet Union to prove China's strength, even as his own people are starving. Government officials go door to door, seizing every scrap of food from peasant homes to meet export quotas. People begin to die, at first quietly, then by the thousands, then by the millions. Parents watch children die of hunger. People eat tree bark, leather belts, mud. In the darkest corners of the famine, and historians have documented this, there are cases of cannibalism. Between 1959 and 1961, an estimated 36 to 45 million people die. And Mao knows. Reports reach him. By 1959, one of his own generals, Peng Dehuai, writes him a private letter begging him to reconsider the policy. Mao's response: he has Peng publicly humiliated, stripped of power, and eventually tortured to death during the Cultural Revolution. The Great Leap Forward continues for 3 more years. Mao does not apologize. He does not stop the exports. He does not open the grain reserves until millions are already dead. He later says, with chilling casualness, "When there is not enough to eat, people starve to death. It is better to let half the people die so that the other half can eat their fill." Half the people. He said that about his own country. By the early 1960s, even senior Communist Party leaders quietly blame Mao for the famine. They begin to sideline him, politely, carefully, the way you handle a dangerous man. Mao notices, and in 1966, he strikes back, not with an army, but with teenagers. He creates the Red Guards, millions of young students, fanatical in their devotion to Mao, armed with the little red book of his quotations, and given one mission: destroy the 4 olds. Old customs, old culture, old habits, and old ideas. What follows is 10 years of orchestrated insanity. Teachers are dragged in front of crowds, forced to wear dunce caps, and beaten by their own students. Professors are sent to pig farms to be re-educated. Doctors, engineers, artists, and writers are imprisoned or executed for the crime of being educated. Centuries-old temples are burned. Irreplaceable historical artifacts are smashed. Libraries are destroyed. The entire intellectual class of China is systematically humiliated and dismantled. These public humiliations are called struggle sessions. Victims are surrounded by screaming crowds, forced to confess invented crimes, and beaten. Many don't survive. Those who do are often permanently broken. One of the victims? Deng Xiaoping, a senior party official who would eventually, after Mao's death, transform China into the economic superpower it is today. During the Cultural Revolution, Deng's own son is thrown from a building by Red Guards. He survives, but is paralyzed for life. Mao watches all of this from his compound. He approves. He encourages it. Estimated deaths from the Cultural Revolution: between 500,000 and 2 million, though some historians believe the true number is far higher, as many deaths were never recorded. Total deaths attributed to Mao's policies across his rule: 40 to 80 million people. To put that in perspective, that's the entire population of France. Gone. This is the question that haunts historians. How? How does a man who wrote beautiful poetry, and Mao was a genuinely gifted poet, cause the deaths of tens of millions of his own people and remain convinced he was a hero? The answer lies in ideology taken to its absolute extreme. Mao genuinely believed that human suffering in the short term was acceptable, necessary, to build the perfect communist society. He had read enough history to know that every great transformation involved blood. He saw himself as China's greatest emperor, its Lenin, its savior. He was also, by any clinical measure, a classic authoritarian narcissist. He demanded absolute loyalty, punished any criticism with savage fury, and surrounded himself with people too terrified to tell him the truth. He never visited a famine zone, never saw the bodies, never sat with a starving family. He read reports, carefully filtered by officials who knew bad news meant death. And he saw a China marching triumphantly toward the future. He also aged into paranoia. In his final years, he grew obese, suffered from multiple diseases, and could barely speak. His inner circle, led by his wife, Jiang Qing, one of the Gang of Four, effectively ran China while he deteriorated. He died on September 9, 1976, at the age of 82. Within a month, his wife and 3 allies were arrested. The Cultural Revolution was declared officially over. China exhaled. Today, the Chinese Communist Party maintains an official verdict on Mao: 70% correct, 30% wrong. His portrait still watches over Tiananmen Square. His face is on every yuan note. His mausoleum draws millions of visitors each year. In China, it is nearly impossible to openly discuss the Great Leap Forward or the Cultural Revolution. The death tolls are not taught in schools. Historians who push too hard on these questions disappear. And that silence is itself a form of power. The final legacy of a man who understood that controlling the story is the ultimate control. Outside China, Mao is frequently romanticized by people who have never had to live under his rule. A symbol of anti-imperialism and peasant revolution, divorced from the catastrophic human cost. But the families of the 40 to 80 million dead don't have the luxury of abstraction. Mao Zedong is a mirror, a warning about what happens when absolute power meets absolute certainty. When a leader decides he knows the destination so clearly that the suffering of millions becomes mere arithmetic. History is full of such men. It always has been. The question, the one that should keep all of us up at night, is whether we're getting better at recognizing them before the bodies start piling up. Beat or not. If this video made you think, share it. History Remembered is history that cannot be repeated. Subscribe for more stories the world needs to hear.